Hello, everyone. Our channel selects viewpoints and analytical articles from think tanks and well-known figures within the Chinese internet and presents them to Western readers so that everyone can understand how China thinks. If you find this helpful, please subscribe, hit the like button, and share our channel. Thank you. China issuing US dollar bonds in Hong Kong. Does this mean America can only swallow its anger? Let me explain this clearly once and for all. The U.S. opened a global casino. Let's call it the WTO. Everyone comes to play here, but you can only play after exchanging your own money for chips, which means U.S. dollars. Inside this casino, everything runs in dollars. In this casino, some players win, that's a trade surplus, and some lose, that's a trade deficit. America's income comes mainly from the casino's rake and transaction fees. At first, this income was steady, but as America's appetite grew, it started lending money. Normal lending wasn't enough, so it moved to high-interest loans. Still not enough, so it began printing dollars and lending them out endlessly. The flood of cheap dollars pushed borrowers deeper into debt, while the U.S. collected interest on both sides. When borrowers defaulted, the U.S. would seize their assets, land, companies, or other strategic holdings. Every round of this dollar tide goes the same way. A wave of debtor nations collapses. The U.S. earns interest, then buys up their land, energy, and banks at a discount. Then new debt is issued again, still in U.S. dollars. The cycle restarts. America prints, lends, earns, and repossesses. When China stopped buying U.S. Treasuries, it effectively cut off one of America's major sources of high-interest income. That's when the trade war began, an attempt to restore that stream of profits. The goal was to regain the ability to collect global interest rent. But when that still didn't work, the U.S. began borrowing on its own account, issuing more debt to finance wars, subsidies, and global infrastructure, borrowing money to lend money, just to keep the wheel spinning. China's recent move, issuing U.S. dollar bonds in Hong Kong, is essentially the same game but played in reverse. The first batch was about $20 billion. The next, $40 billion. In doing this, China is borrowing in U.S. dollars from global investors and then using those funds to lend to developing nations. In effect, China is taking over the U.S.'s role as creditor to the world, turning America's own financial tool against it. The U.S. earns two main types of income from this casino. One is the flow, the interest, taxes and commissions from lending. The other is conversion, turning paper money into ownership of real global assets. But now that China is collecting part of those flows, the U.S. must keep printing and circulating dollars, or else its entire system of global extraction collapses. When China issues dollar bonds, it's not just fundraising. It's redirecting the current. On one hand, it weakens the U.S.'s control over global liquidity. On the other, it uses the borrowed dollars to lend onward to other countries, effectively reclaiming the interest margin that used to belong to Washington. That's why the U.S. is nervous. Its once-free global rent income is now being shared. The empire's profit margins are shrinking, while its dependents keep growing. The highest form of industry is finance, and the highest form of finance is high-interest lending. In modern history, only two nations have built empires purely on finance, Britain and the United States. Both sustain their power not by making things, but by lending to those who do. So the real contest between China and the U.S. isn't about chips or trade, but about who controls the flow of credit, who acts as the world's lender. Once America loses that, it loses the core of its global influence. The current competition is a test of endurance, who can issue and sustain their debt longer. Each round is a battle of stamina. America depends on global demand for its treasuries. China is now issuing its own dollar bonds globally, gradually pulling part of that demand toward itself. Both sides are locked in. There's no easy retreat. Now, a supplement on why China issues U.S. dollar bonds in Hong Kong. Think of it like a debt substitution. Imagine a poor farmer who once borrowed heavily from a ruthless landlord. The landlord kept charging high interest, and when the farmer couldn't pay, he seized the farmer's land and livestock. Now a new lender steps in, lending the farmer enough to pay off the landlord and taking over the debt. The farmer now owes the new lender instead of the old one. That's essentially what's happening here. By issuing U.S. dollar bonds, China raises money in dollars, pays off part of the old creditor, the U.S., and becomes the new lender to those same debt-ridden countries. The old landlord gets paid off. The new lender gains both interest income and leverage. If the farmer still can't repay the new lender, they strike another deal, perhaps granting mining rights, port operations, or infrastructure contracts in return for another loan. Over time, the lender not only earns interest, but also gains control of key assets and trade routes. The farmer keeps working, but part of everything he produces now flows to the new lender. This process extends globally. Most countries face pressure from dollar-denominated debt, so by issuing dollar bonds and lending those funds onward, China turns those debtors into its own clients. It's a way of recycling dollars for influence. Issuing dollar bonds is also a form of political signaling, a reassurance that China still plays within the global financial system, but now with tools that weaken America's monopoly over interest income. It's a move that blurs the line between compliance and counterattack. Strategically, it's also a form of financial encirclement. Many oil-rich countries hold vast dollar reserves, but can't freely invest in U.S. assets due to sanctions or restrictions. When China issues dollar bonds, these countries finally have a safe, politically acceptable way to invest their dollars, effectively funneling U.S. liquidity into Chinese-linked projects. When the bond risk is higher and the yields are longer, this move becomes even more strategic. When China issues euro-denominated bonds, the purpose is slightly different: to build closer ties with European financial institutions and to attract European investors' capital into Chinese projects. It's about deepening cooperation between financial centers. As for Russia and some others issuing bonds in RMB, that's because they trade directly with China and don't have enough dollar or euro reserves. Borrowing in RMB gives them liquidity to fund trade with China. And that's actually good for RMB internationalization. The more countries borrow in RMB, the wider its usage becomes. Step by step, layer by layer, its global share grows, quietly but steadily. That concludes today's narration. Through the voices of China's thinkers, we have explored how policy, finance, and strategy intersect in the contest over who lends to the world, and on whose terms. For clarity and flow, some parts of the original discussion have been summarized or slightly adjusted. Certain technical or context-heavy sections have also been refined to make them easier for international audiences to follow. If you would like to read the full text or discuss the ideas in more depth, you are welcome to reach out to us directly. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, share, and subscribe to How China Thinks. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.